Namaste, good evening. Welcome to Citti Media and the Festival of Bharat. Today we are joined
Namaste.
by a very interesting person, Mr. Aman Choudhary, who is coming out with a new book of his. It's called The Unarmed Struggle, or should I rather say Armed Struggle, the alternative history of Indian freedom struggle. And he's taken about 5 years to write this book, and the link will be below in the description. And for those of you who are interested, can check it out. And we are going to be having a conversation about many of the aspects which have intersectionality, which have interconnectedness in our Indian history, but have not been explored. First of all, Amanji, thank you so much. Namaste and welcome.
Namaste to everybody. Yeah.
How are you and how's everything? I am to believe that you're in Chennai and the situation seems a little
yes, but thanks to the internet, I was able to do it, the comfort of my home. So it's okay, it's fine.
Right. Good to hear that. Now, first of all, give us a brief introduction about the book. What made you write this book?
Sure. So just to correct you, this book, although is actually a collection of travel experiences of 5 years of travel, collected travel, and sort of connecting these different dots together all over the world, Right. And this book really just talks about, if you look at the title of the book, it's called The Unarmed Struggle, where the un is cancelled. The book is about the struggle which no one knows about in India. So as growing up in India till I was 17, I went to high school here, and we are taught about Gandhi and Satyagraha, and there was a movie Gandhi, so it was very Gandhi centric. The narrative was about Gandhi and Nehru, a little bit of Subhash Chandra Bose, but very little of Savarkar to nothing actually from which school I studied in. Right. And so I realized that there needs to be a story told to the people of India about the armed struggle, which is the opposite of the unarmed struggle, right. Which is also very interesting, but they have been hairbrushed from our history completely, Right. So my idea is to bring all that details in my book. And also when you think of Savarkar or Aurobindo Ghosh, Subhash Chandra Bose, Bhagat Singh, you think of them as these individual people, although they are independently doing something and they didn't have like a major play. But in the reality is far from it. In fact, they are very, very well connected, these right. people. And my book shows that how these links are maintained, how they work with each other, what causes to the other wakes up, it's basically a journey, that's how I call it.
And in the book, you employ certain terms like the Pandavas of London, the Stanford professor, and the Tokyo chef. These are very interesting terminologies for our viewers. Right. To explain what this means.
Sure. Indian history, as I mentioned, my book is about Kshatriyata, right? About the fight which we had, which people not are unaware of. But my book story starts in London in the year 1901, when Savarkar actually moves, from India to London. And around that same time, it's about Aurobindo Ghosh, who comes from London to India, his journey. So they are both sort of crossing paths, but I call them and their groups the Pandavas of London. So in the case of Savarkar, what happens is that when he joins London and goes there for his higher studies, he is staying at a place called India House. Now, India House was started by a person from Kutch by the name Shyamji Krishna Verma. What he did is he housed a lot of Indian students together. But this India House was actually running an underground, there were a lot of underground activities, hidden activities. They were planning a murder for one of the people called by the name Lord Curzon Wiley, who was a British officer, now retired in London. They were making bomb-making factories over there, and and sending that bomb-making technologies to India. So, which is very fascinating. And there's this group of people whom I call the Pandavas of London, who plan these major activities. And also this group in London was connected with something called the India-Paris Society, led by a lady called Bikaji Kama. Now, Bikaji Kama actually wore a sari in the early 1900s and went to Germany and furthered India's first flag. So they actually make India's first flag, which is based on the 1857 flag, where it's got lotuses. So I have documented all of those things in my book. So that is Savarkar's story. And then what ultimately happens is that group gets busted in the UK, and the group's dispersed. Shyamji Krishna Verma leaves for Geneva. Then few people get arrested, few people escape to US, and that's sort of the second part of my story, which is the Stanford professor. But also what is happening is, incidentally, there is Aurobindo Ghosh, whom we think of as a spiritual guru, but a lot of people don't know that he actually had a very violent past. And he was working with this group to set up bomb-making factories in India, and gets arrested for something called the Alipur conspiracy case, where they try to blow up a court magistrate, where the magistrate actually dies. And Aurobindo somehow escapes to Pondicherry, which is a French territory, but his brother unfortunately gets arrested and gets shipped off to Andamans, where he meets Savarkar. So that's the story of Pandavas of London in a nutshell. And my book explains this part, in a very beautiful, moving way of how each event takes place and who are the people involved and all of those things.
Right. And what about the Tokyo chef?
Okay. So do you want to talk about the Stanford professor, because that is in chronological?
Right? Okay, we'll begin with Stanford professor and then the
So the reason I wanted to tell you that is because the Tokyo chef comes later in the story.
Sure.
So I'll talk to you about the Stanford professor. Now, everybody must have heard of Stanford University. Google came out of there, and a whole bunch of startups which were there. But a lot of people don't know that just like Google was a revolution, and it was a startup. There was another startup which created a revolution in 1910. That too by Indians, which very few people know about. In fact, I went for attended a few classes in Stanford, and even while attending, I was not aware that there was a history of Indian students in 1910. So this startup was called, I call it the Great Indian Freedom Startup, but it was actually called the Gadar Revolution. What happened was, there was a brilliant young man by the name Lala Hardayal, who was part of India House, who was Savarkar's, you can call it roommate or hostel mate in that hostel, India House. And he escapes from London. He's one of the Pandavas. And he ends up becoming Stanford as a professor. In fact, from what I understand, he was Stanford University's first professor of Indian origin. So that was the one. But that was his day job. His secret job was to plan a revolution in India, and he named that the Gadar Revolution. Gadar means revolution, basically. And he started the Gadar movement. He got some students from Berkeley, from Stanford, and grouped them together and created this startup, which was in San Francisco. And in this house called the Gadar House, they had a printing press, and he was printing newspapers speaking about Indian freedom. You have to also understand, America was not connected with Britain at that time, so America didn't care what kind of stuff was going on over there, because it was an independent country. And his whole idea was based on a research which he had done with Savarkar in London, where Savarkar came up with this book called the 1857, India's First War of Independence.
Yes.
He called India's 1857 war the first war of independence. Now, what happened over there was Savarkar said in his research when he was a student in London, if the Indian soldiers in the British army go against the British, that's the day India will win freedom. Because the British is ruling based on the Indian soldiers who are working for them. So why not create a mutiny in them? Why not do something which they can go ahead and work against the British? So that's the whole basis of Savarkar's research. Now, what Lala Hardayal did was nothing but executed that same story, or you can call it the cell algorithm or software, and he applied it along with these students to create disharmony among the Indian soldiers in India as well as abroad, because there were Indian regiments in Hong Kong, in Singapore, wherever the British were ruling. And what he does over there, the Stanford professor, is, he from San Francisco is able to arrange arms and send people and all of those things, and the revolt does happen. Unfortunately, there's a leak in the whole story, and the very last minute, the armory guards were changed from Indians to Europeans. So in India, the Ghadar movement failed. However, in Singapore, the Ghadar movement did succeed. But since it was just Singapore, they held it up for a week. But lately, then everybody was captured and killed. But in Singapore, the British had a really, really hard time because of the Ghadar movement.
Very interesting.
And also this movement called the Ghadar movement is actually very closely linked with Jallianwala Bagh, which my book talks about.
Okay.
So the story, what we hear about why Jallianwala Bagh happened, and the research which I found it, were very different. So it has got everything to do with the Ghadar movement. So that's what the Stanford professor is all about. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's very, very interesting. And in fact, because there is a re-attempt to narrate our history in its true sense, especially in the last few years, many more of these stories are coming into the picture. And I think you've done a wonderful job of putting these stories together. And especially only when you knit them together is when you get a different perspective and you get the actual picture of what our freedom struggle was.
Right.
Before we proceed further, I'm still curious about what the Tokyo Chef is.
Okay. In fact, he again is one of the most unspoken people in India. I was surprised that I actually came across a few Bengalis also who had not heard of him. The current generation of Bengali, the young youth of Bengali today. The name of this person is called Rash Bihari Bose.
Right.
And he's the Tokyo Chef. So now I'll just tell you a little bit about Rash Bihari Bose. Rash Bihari Bose had escaped to Japan, but before his escape, he had tried to have an assassination attempt on Lord Hardinge.
Right.
During that time, he was connected with Savarkar and Ghosh, during that period. And Lord Hardinge was the Viceroy of India. So you can think about that. He was the Prime Minister of India during that time, the Mountbatten of India. And they were so scared, the British got so scared about all these violent activities which were happening in Calcutta, that they decided to move their headquarters or the capital from Calcutta to Delhi. And there was a ceremony and everything, and they decided to kill Hardinge on that day itself, and they missed it by a very small margin, but it left Hardinge very incapacitated. Somehow, during that time, Rash Bihari Bose escapes from the scene, not arrested, and his cover is not blown. But he again was involved in the Ghadar movement with Lala Hardayal. And what happens during this time is that he gets busted. His name gets busted.
Right.
Somehow he manages to go ahead and escape all the way to Japan. Because again, you have to understand, Japan was not connected with any country. So he just managed his way through Japan. And from what I understood, that it was Rabindranath Tagore who actually helped him escape and, go to Japan and settle down. Now, once he landed in Tokyo, he needed to earn a living, right? So he he became a chef at this restaurant called Nokomura. And by the way, that restaurant still stands in, not the original restaurant, but that restaurant is still there in Nokomura.
Right.
And he became very famous for a curry called chicken curry. It's called the Indo curry in Japan.
Right.
So the Japanese had never really been exposed to Indian food, but his curry became so famous that everybody in Tokyo knew about him.
Right.
Now, who, according to you, has formed the Indian National Army? Who's the father of Indian National? Who founded Indian National Army? According to you,
in popular literature, it's known as Subhash Chandra Bose.
It's actually not Subhash Chandra Bose.
Right.
It's actually Rash Bihari Bose.
Right.
Because his restaurant became so famous that during the restaurant, with the connections, he was able to get close to the rulers of Japan, the emperor and the military and all. And he made a deal with the Japanese that you've got all these prisoners of war in World War II, right? And Japan had even captured, Burma and, a lot of the Southeastern Asian, like Singapore was under their control. And he said that you give me all these soldiers and I'll make them the Indian National Army. Right. So it was actually Rash Bihari Bose's idea about this INA. And later in the course of things in my book, you'll understand how Subhash Chandra Bose actually joins him and goes through the INA. So that is actually the Tokyo chef.
Very interesting. Another very interesting fact that I found from your book is you mentioned June 21st, 1940 as a major turning point in Indian history. Why do you say that?
Yes. I'll explain to you. In fact, June 21st, 1940, and I could be missing a day plus minus, so bear with that error, was actually a very important event. So if you look at the history of Subhash Chandra Bose in detail, you know that he was part of the Congress and he had a disagreement with Nehru and Gandhi, and he formed something called the Forward Bloc. I don't know if you are aware of that. Now, he was trying different things and he was sort of almost frustrated that, this is not how we are going to win our freedom and we need to do something new. He ends up meeting with Savarkar. And Savarkar, from the research which I did, in that meeting tells Bose that, listen, you stop all these Forward Bloc and all of those things. I have written a book in it, the 1857 book. I know what the British are weak upon. The day the Indian soldiers will go against the British, the rulers, the Indian soldiers working for the British, that's the day they will fall apart and they will run from India. Right. And he says that I have a person by the name Rash Bihari Bose who's formed an INA. You go and escape to Europe and you make a deal with Hitler, because enemy's enemy is enemy, right? World War II had already begun. Right. And you say there are Indian soldiers there. You make an Indian National Army in Europe and then march towards India through Afghanistan, and Rash Bihari Bose's army will go through the east. Right. Now, when both of them come to India, right, the Indian soldiers will realize that they're going to shoot at their brothers, right? Because they were all part of the same group, right? Yeah. And instead of pointing guns at their brothers, they'll actually point the gun at the British. So you will have this entire army and you'll create a mutiny. So, so a lot of people in my book, you will understand, ask me that if S. Bose had to go to Japan, why did he go to Europe? But you'll actually realize that he went to Europe. He set up an Indian National Army in Italy, an Indian National Army in Germany. He set up radio station there. All of those things are documented in my book. Right. But this was, in my opinion, a turning point. If this meeting hadn't been, right, And, if this idea would not have been planted in S. Bose's mind, I don't know how he would have been able to interconnect this whole weave together.
Interesting. We had Abhijit Chawda a few weeks back.
Yes,
And
yes, yes.
that show became very popular because he took on Gandhi in a different light. Because
Yes.
Gandhi is, according to some people, is very highly overrated for his contributions to the Indian
Right.
freedom struggle, or at least he
Right.
shadows over the different kind of people and activities that happened and that eventually led to the Indian independence being sought,
Right.
1947. What, according to you, was Gandhi's role? How do you see Gandhi's role in the Indian independence?
So yeah, so it's a complicated question, and I don't want to get too much into that particular thing, but my approach to the whole thing is that we look at the Indian freedom struggle with a very singular focus, right? And as much as effort Gandhiji had in unifying the nation and putting it together, in my opinion, the British did not leave India because we were doing satyagraha and we were singing bhajans. That's, in my opinion, that was not the one. Now, I'm not undermining the fact that he did not unite the nation, So I have heard stories of my forefathers who were a very big fan of Gandhiji and their movement. But was it a comfy relationship with the British? Was he completely independent? The jury is out, and I'm not able to comment on it because I have not studied all of his things in great detail. So I have not really been able to give you a factor on that. But when I did hear about a speech by Ambedkar, which was after independence and on BBC, and it's actually on YouTube, he says that Gandhiji's role was very negligible, during that milieu of time. And also, actually, the Prime Minister of India was visiting India after independence. I think he was on a private holiday with his wife. And he, in one of his interviews, also says that the contribution, why he left India, Gandhiji's role was minimal. And he says it was Subhash Chandra Bose because of which we left, So those things are all documented in my books, the newspaper cuttings, all of those things are there. So I don't want it to sound it's like my opinion. It's the milieu of time during that time, all the people were talking about it during that time. That's what I want to voice.
Because Prime Minister Attlee was the predecessor of Prime Minister Churchill, and Churchill probably took cognizance to Gandhi as a big threat to the British rule in India. And there are these contradictions which need to be studied, like you said. I think there needs to be more literature produced on how Gandhi was particularly perceived, not just right now, about how big a role he played in the Indian independence movement, but also back then, because there seems to be varying literature on this from.
So I will just give you a comparative analysis on that. If, let's say, Gandhi was considered and Nehru were considered extremely, dangerous to the British Empire and its existence, right? Why was people like Savarkar and Sanyal and Barin Ghosh sent to Andamans? Right? So my question is, if he's that, if Gandhiji and Nehruji were that dangerous to the British Empire, why were they not shipped off to Andamans? British could have done that. There was nothing preventing it from there. And in my book, I have gone through the depth of the torture which the soldiers had to, where the prisoners had to go through at Andamans. It was difficult for me to even write that, the kind of tortures which I had to actually edit out. So I'm really not sure whether that was like a mutual relationship or was it completely independent. The jury is out on that, and I don't want my book to be one versus the other. I want everybody to understand this movement and then make a call what role and what percentage each role played.
And you also mentioned Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose as one of the greatest generals in the modern history. So
Yes,
please elaborate on this.
sure. So let me ask you one thing. Today, a person leaves from high school, right? Goes to college. It takes about 4 years to do a bachelor's degree.
Yeah.
And that's the time you just enter the real world and you start a job and start a life and everything. So in about 4 years, you graduate to becoming useful to the society. Sort of that's sort of the baseline. Now imagine Subhash Chandra Bose in 4 years, he escaped from India, right?
Right.
With very little or I think no money in his pocket,
Right.
because he went, travels all over to Europe, then goes to in a submarine from Europe to Japan, right?
Yeah.
Negotiates, starts in India, forms an Indian army, and actually people don't know, but India had its own currency. The Azad Hind government was an independent Indian government recognized by Japan. It had its own currency. It had its own prime minister, which was Subhash Chandra Bose. So he forms this Indian government, marches into Andamans, which was in Japanese rule. He actually digs a flag in Andamans, and there's Andamans was in India rule. Then marches through to Manipur, and in Manipur again there was Indian. He actually hoists an Indian flag on Manipur land. This is before 1945, 1944, around that time frame in Moirang. And recently, President Kovenji actually visited that place, and now they made a museum and things of that nature. So imagine somebody with nothing to coming and ruling, putting your own flag on your country in 4 years. Now, which general in modern day history could do that kind of things? It was unfathomable. And trying to work with so many different people with different languages, different cultures, and navigating all of that, but with single mind. So I personally think that he was a true Kshatriya. I mean, he, and I have read so much about his childhood and his adult life and everything, and it's nothing but short of fascination. Right. So if Gandhi is the father of the nation, I think he should be in that same category as well. He should even share that gold medal.
The other debate that is going on is about how he died, and some of there are several theories that have been put. And how much weightage do you place to the theory that he died in a air crash that in a way in which it's popularly known today?
Sure. So I actually never mentioned the word died in this particular thing, because there are the story, the air crash story has a lot of holes in it. Right. For example, the Taiwan government has officially declared that there was no plane crash during that time. Right. And what I don't understand is that Subhash Chandra Bose plane crashes and he dies in that air crash, not a car crash, an air crash. Yeah. And his partner Habibullah Rahman is just outside with a couple of scratches, which again, I find it hard to believe. I can understand maybe in a car crash that can happen, but in an air crash, it's again hard. Yeah. So that theory is got full of particular holes in it. In my particular understanding, what happened is Subhash Chandra Bose possibly faked his own death, and he had planned this, he had scripted this out. And his idea was to go to Russia, because Subhash Chandra Bose had actually went to Afghanistan through Russia. So he had some links down there. And I think something went wrong there, in my opinion. And just to tie a few, connect a few dots, if you actually see when Narendra Modi ji's government, declassified the files, there's a testimony by Shamlal, which was Nehru's stenographer, which I have written. where Nehru is actually communicating with Stalin and with Attlee that Subhash Chandra Bose is in Russia. So this is 5 months after Bose has been declared dead. So, that is the one. Then what happens is, as soon as India gets its freedom, we have ambassadors at different countries. Guess who's the first ambassador of to Russia from India? It is Jawaharlal Nehru's own sister, Vijaya Lakshmi Pandit. Now, these dots somehow tell me that there is something which is happening over there. And there is a lot of things. I mean, there are books which Anuj has written. There's a story about Gumnami Baba, which fairly I have not looked into it because I am not to the belief that Subhash Chandra Bose will come here and then stay as a Gumnami Baba. But that's completely my theory. I could be wrong. I don't want to. I have not even looked into that particular thing. But the air crash theory is got full of holes, and that Russia link, there are many dots which you can connect, straight, in that. So the jury's out. I think it's a couple of years, and people will find out what exactly happened as the files get more and more declassified. And it'll be an exciting story to hear. So
I wish that in India we had that culture of declassification. Like they do this in the West, especially with the CIA files and everything. They're much more systematic in this nature, but here we talk about the security consequences and political consequences and whatnot. Maybe there is a genuine concern out of it, maybe there is not, but only time can tell. And I hopefully, at least before the time we are old enough, I hope we get to know the truth about what really happened during our independence struggle. I also attribute March 15th, 1946 as a very important day to India's freedom victory. Why is that?
Right. Well, August 15, 1947 was a transfer of power. That's not the day the British decided to leave, right? So that's like doing a Grah Pravesh, right? So when you do a Grah Pravesh, is not the day you buy the house. The day you buy the house is actually the day you make a decision to buy the house, where you make the deal. So if I kind of tell you March 15th, 1946 is the day Attlee decides to make it free. And why is that? So that's actually the day Savarkar had his last laugh. Now, just connecting back the different dots together. So you have March 15th, 1946, where Attlee goes ahead and says, I want to send my colleagues to India as speedily as possible. There's a word called speedily. Now, this is in the Parliament records, by the way, the British Parliament records, you can go and see that. Now, my idea is that if we're a non-violent movement in unarmed, so why is there a speedily, when you know the other person is not going to pick up the arms and fight, then what's the issue? You can do it. But Feb 1946, what happens? There's actually a mutiny in the Indian Navy and the Indian Air Force, which everybody knows about it, right? So now you can connect from March to Feb. Now, what happens between March and January, right? The prisoners of war, which is the 3 prisoners of war, has that famous Red Fort trial, right? Which everybody knows about. Now, what happens is the British government decides to make that trial a public trial. And that, in my concern, was a real self-goal, so to say, because suddenly what happened is people who had not heard about Bose and his achievements because of the censorship rules which were there involved. So the moment World War II took place, there was censorship. So newspapers and everybody couldn't report what was happening, right? So suddenly the whole nation finds out about what is happening, and there's a wave of this particular thing, right? And that particular event of January 96, and I'm talking about plus minus couple of weeks over here, right? Creates a mutiny. And if you look at the pictures which I saw where, there were soldiers on the streets and they were, that's the day Savarkar's dream came through, is that there's actually a mutiny within the Indian army. and it's game set over. And that's what basically goes to the March 15th deadline, sorry, the date where Attlee basically says. Also, the Attlee communicates the same thing 2-3 years after, when he visits India on holiday, where he says that we had decided the day the soldiers, Indian soldiers working for us, go against us, that's the day when we are going to leave. So when you connect all those dots together, for me, March 15th, 1946 is that day. And it's a very historical day, because that's the day where so much of struggle, be it from whichever group, actually led to that historical day. August 15, 1947 was a transfer of power. It's like, okay, I'm handing over the keys of the house to you. So.
Very interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that. But before we conclude, I want to ask you this. As governments change, as political parties come and go in power, there's always a heated debate about what is the true version of our history. Whom do we believe, whom do we not? Because conveniently, a lot of times the people in power use history to their own political advantage, and we've seen that happen. So in that sense, even the history that is taught to us in textbooks and in age-old journals and whatnot seems to have a very old school view about how history needs to be seen. Earlier. In that sense, what kind of changes do you think our history books need, so that our youngsters are exposed to all the sides and they can probably come to a particular conclusion once they know the facts of what everything are?
Right. So there are two things out here. So when are the history books going to change? It's very interesting. You can change the history books, but you have to understand the entire educational system of India from the 1980s onwards, not going too much into it, is very left-centric, Marxist-centric, right? Yeah. So you could have the textbooks changed, but you also need to build an entire streamline of teachers with that same thought process. So if you can see, there's a disconnect over there. So I am not to the opinion that we should change the textbooks right now. Although it happens, I'm very happy. I would love for, I should have known that Chola Empire lasted 1600 years. And so many things which I've been learning, thanks to a lot information from your channel also, by the way. They have fantastic things, and Sanjeev Sanyal has done a lot of work on Ashoka and breaking a lot of popular narratives on that. So what's going to happen is the textbook is going to be, like, you can call it the Doordarshan of India, where everybody, it'll be there. You will hear it because you need to hear it. But social media has already won the war. So now there are so many. You look at the Abhinav, whom you mentioned, the person who's doing a lot of work on. Yeah, what fantastic YouTube shows he's been having every day, which I've been listening to it, and he does such a great job on. So the whole purpose is that as a nation, as citizens of our nation, we should have that access to that information. We should understand it.
But also people are a little unhappy about this. They say that only a few court-appointed historians should have the privilege and the honor of writing history, and not everybody who's on YouTube and who has the access to social media can talk about history.
No, I'm not a historian. I'm actually a computer engineer, a self-employed person. Today you have the computer, you have the internet, and you have access to information, right? So if I'm able to put up a story and tie up a facts behind it and weave that thing together, right? There is no authority in that particular person. Anybody can go ahead and do it. So the beauty is now today, whether the historians can keep saying what they want, but they are in their own la-la land. Right? Yeah. Because today you've got Vikram Sampath, who is completely done I was shocked when I read about his book about Savarkar, and what we think about Savarkar, and the kind of things what he has brought to the light. You throw it in another this thing. And then there is my book, which talks about this armed struggle. So let the information flow free. And I mentioned that this will become like, Doordarshan or Times of India, which will just come to your house.
Right.
And you will just glance through it and pass through it. But the real information, you'll get it on Twitter. So that's how. Yeah.
Session. It was a lovely session hosting you.
Thank you.
I'm sure our audience will find this very, very interesting. And please do let us know what you think in the comment section below. Thank you so much, Amanji. It's a real pleasure having you.
Yes, thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Want to give a final message before we conclude to our viewers?
Yes, sure. The ebook is completely free. You can download it on your phone or your Kindle phone on the Google Play Store. The beauty about this book is that it's not a very thick book, which will take you weeks and weeks to read. It's something which you can do it in 2 evenings or 3 evenings at the max. And also it's an index. So you have all the information. Each and every event is backed up by a proof. I have gone through the effort of going through 100-year-old newspapers, actually 150-year-old newspapers, and put that cuttings during that time and pasting it. So I hope you enjoy it. And please, I have a request is that after you read it, put whether you like it or you don't like it or whatever the comment is on Amazon, because that feedback is very important to me. And and to the viewers also. And I think together in our 75th year of independence, it's about time we learn the history of our forefathers, the air we are breathing, the beautiful country we are in. We should be knowing that there is a lot of blood behind this as well. So that's my final message. Namaste to everybody.
Namaste. Thank you so much.
Namaste. We hope you enjoyed this Citti Media content. Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.